Check one, two, three. Hey everybody, it's Michael Helms, also known as Michael the Sound Guy, and this is the Location Sound Podcast. You know, each episode we talk with location sound mixers, boom ops, and other industry pros about the various aspects of recording sound on location, whether it's for feature and independent films, TV commercials, interviews, any time where dialogue from actors is recorded. I started my career in the recording studios in New York City with some of the big artists back in the day, and later on projects for networks like HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, and the Cartoon Network. As time went by, I got out of the studio and began working in production sound. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, thanks for joining us. All right, my guest today has traveled the world working as a production sound mixer and has worked in almost every state in the USA. Please welcome Matt Vogel.
Hey, how's it going?
Awesome. Glad you could be here.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, now, Matt, we always start the show by asking when you're mixing on set, what's in your audio kit? So tell us about your mics, your mixer, power distribution, and everything in between.
So I've got Sound Devices 633 is the main mixer that I use. I have a 788 as well when I do more kind of studio-based stuff. But the 633 has been great for me, and I'm a Lectrosonics guy, so I have a whole mess of SRBs, and I have an SRC that I got recently, which I've been playing with. And then I've got mostly SMQV transmitters. I got a couple of UM400s that I bought years ago that I still use, and I've got an LT transmitter, the multi-band, that I use with the SRC as well. And then I use the SRBs for hops as well as in my bag. And then for microphones, I mostly stick with the Sanken COS11s like everybody else. I've got a Countryman B6 that I use as kind of my backup emergency mic when I can't find a good hiding spot with either my COS11s or I have some Tram TR50s that are just kind of sit in my bag that I rarely use, but sometimes, sometimes they're good mics to have as well. But the B6 is kind of like my backup, like when all else fails, I gotta pop that mic out of a buttonhole and it can't be seen. That's a great mic for that. I have a MKH50 Sennheiser and an MKH60, which I bring with me wherever I go. Those have been great. The 60, I've had two of them. I sold one recently, but those things have been great for all my world travels and being out and, flying in airplanes and getting to different locations. It's super durable. I actually left one out in the rain at a football game once and came back and it was working that night in the hotel room. So I've been very happy with the durability of those Sennheisers. Lockets, I use the Ultrasyncs. Just got a couple of those, and yeah, that's what I pretty much use.
Okay. What kind of batteries do you use?
Oh, MP1s, and then I have an MD6 power distribution from Guy Solutions, which Gene Martin is a guy out in California who makes those. So I've been using that for a while, and it's been pretty good.
Oh, headphones. What kind of headphones do you like?
I've always been using the Sony MDR-7506s. I've been mixing for about 15 years, and I've been using these same headphones, not the same pair, but that brand forever. Super durable. I've dropped these things hundreds of times on the ground, and they're still kicking it. They sound great, and their durability is really big for me. I'm kind of rough on my gear, so I like stuff that takes a beating and still keeps on working.
So let's talk about some of the projects you've worked on. I noticed on your bio you had mentioned the Oprah Winfrey Show. So tell us a little bit about the setup and what you remember from the show.
So I worked with Oprah for about 4 years. After she finished the talk show, she was doing that for 25 years, she started a show called Oprah's Next Chapter, which was Oprah trying to get out of the studio. So she would interview celebrities in their homes, on film sets, on private islands, and we'd go all over the place. We went to Skywalker Ranch and interviewed George Lucas. We spent 2 weeks in India. We did a refugee camp in Haiti after the earthquake with Sean Penn. And they all, on paper, look like a basic one-on-one interview setup, but really at any moment there could be an audible and we had to be ready for that. So we we would plan for days for a sit-down interview, but drop of a hat, boom, Oprah would say, all right, we're going this way. So we always had to be ready for anything. So our audio setups for that were, we had 5 to 6 cameras, one on a jib and usually 3 or 4 on sticks. And then we had like 1 or 2 handheld cameras, more kind of BTS behind the scenes shots. And I had wireless SRs on each one of those cameras, just in case we were ready to break off. I couldn't go hardline to all those. Usually we're in one location, but just in case, she decided to walk away, we all had to break off and be ready to go. I would always put a Sanken cost 11 on Oprah. I usually have 2 plant mics hidden in between her and her interviewee, just as a backup in case something went down or, if there was a rustle or something like that. They didn't like to break up the interviews if it was possible. So I always tried to hide something, whether it be like a cub or, a cost 11 in a plant or arm of a chair, wherever. It never sounded great, but it was necessary. I was able to hire a lot of local A2s and second mixers on those shoots, which was really fun meeting different mixers around the country and around the world. I used a lot of like the Facebook forums. There's a lot of Facebook sound mixer forums. And I would get referrals from different mixers, and I would narrow that down to who I'd want to hire. And I would always try to find guys who had complementing gear to me, because we would try to match our bags just in case a mixer had to go ahead to a second location. I wanted to make sure that they had same matching frequency blocks as me. So I was finding a lot of guys with Lectrosonics and the same blocks which I use. So some of the shoots were pretty complicated, where we'd have to leapfrog different scenes. So it would be essentially a long walk and talk with Oprah and the talent, stopping along the way, talking to different groups of people. So for example, when we were in Haiti, Sean Penn had set up a refugee camp, like on a golf course. It was a temporary camp, but it ended up being there for well over a year or 2. And we were walking through the camp, and we would have maybe 4 or 5 stops along this loop where she would interview maybe five different people. We would have 2 mixers, and we had 1 A2. We had 2 788 rigs, 5 inputs for the guests, 1 for Oprah, 1 for Sean, and then we'd have a boom. So the A rig, which is myself, I would have the first 5 people mic'd up in the first scene, and the B rig would have the next group of people along the path. So after we were done with interviewing the first group, the second mixer would continue walking with Oprah and Sean to the next location. And myself and the A2 would pull all the mics off of the first people, and we'd run to the third setup and start pre-micing everybody up there. And that whole time, the B mixer was walking with Oprah, recording the second scene. And when we were done pre-micing the third group, I would run back to the second scene, pick up Oprah and Sean as they were ready to walk to the third scene, and continue recording. And then I would have the mics rolling and for the third scene. So they just walk up to a scene, and it was seamless. And that time, the second mixer and the A2 would pull all the mics off of the second setup and run ahead to the fourth setup and pre-mic everybody there. So we were constantly leapfrogging, putting mics on, putting mics off, and it was really the only way we could do it. And it was a pretty interesting way of approaching a shoot. I guess if we had bigger, 688s, we could have done it all at the same time. But at that time with the 788s, that was pretty much the max that we could do.
How many times did you have to do this in a day?
Just one for a day. So we would have a lot of setup time. We'd fly to a location, and we had a lot of location scouting time, which was great. So we'd go do a location scout. I'll be able to do all my scans wherever we were, make sure I had, I'm running, maybe 15 different frequencies. So I always had to make sure that I had my freaks clear. And then we'd have a setup day. And then the shoot day, we had enough time in the morning to set up. So everything, we had plenty of time to set everything up. So when she arrived, we were instantly rolling. There's a lot of BTS shots of that show that they would include. And literally we're rolling as she's showing up, and I would have to get my mic on her as she's walking into set, and all the cameras are on me and her, and that was always included in the show. So it was kind of weird. Like every episode, there's a shot of Matt either slating or putting a mic on somebody. So that was always pretty interesting. But we did this several times. The first time we did this was when she took her whole audience to Australia. And we had this one scene on the Sydney Harbor Bridge where we had to film her and 300 guests all climbing up on top of the Sydney Harbor Bridge. And everybody was tethered in with safety chains. You can only walk in certain paths. And it was very segmented where you could walk. And there's a lot of steel up there. And RF was really, really bad. We were doing our location scout and we don't have much distance on here. So we had to figure out a way to place mixers. And we had a lot of local mixers that we had from Australia that we hired. And we would, place different mixers along the path of the bridge from where she started up into the top so that, we always had a clear signal no matter where we were.
Now, that brings up an interesting question as well. So people wanting to buy new wireless sets since we're losing the 600 megahertz range, what block should we buy? What's our frequency range that you would recommend?
That's a good question. I think your best bet is to, if you have a local sound shop in your town, is talk to them because they usually have a good idea of what the best blocks are in town. Like in Chicago, we go to Second City Sound and they have the whole spectrum mapped out for everybody. So if you call up and say, hey, I want to buy some wireless. Do I go up to block 23? Do I go to block 22? And they'll say, well, those aren't very good, but you should do wideband frequencies. So Lectrosonics and Zaxcom and WizzyCom all have multi-block wireless now. So instead of just being stuck to block 20 or block 21, you've got block 470, 19, and 20. So you've got 3 blocks in one unit. So you have a much bigger spectrum that you can scan through, giving you a lot more frequencies to choose from because it's shrinking. When I first started, we had all the way up to block 29, I think, and we're going down. I think we're losing 24, 25, and 26. If we haven't lost it already, it's happening really soon. So it's shrinking quickly. So it's nice that there's really only 2 blocks, essentially, A1 and B1, that you can buy. If you're buying them in new wireless, it's probably best to go into those wide bands.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that you had worked on a lot of the Food Network shows and with Andrew Zimmern and things like that and traveled the world. So tell us a little bit about recording food shows around the world.
So I started working on cooking shows I filled in for a mixer on diners, drive-ins, and dives when they were in Chicago, and ended up doing about 10 to 15 episodes with them and learned a lot of the tricks from their mixer, Jeff Assel, who's been on the show since, I think, the pilot. So, I think there are 25 seasons. He's been there for a long time. And through that, I met other DPs and producers who worked on other food shows and got hooked up with Andrew Zimmern's spinoff of Bizarre Foods called Delicious Destinations. And I worked on that pilot where we shot in Greece and Florence and Paris and London, all back to back. That was, I think, 20 days that we were gone for. And from the pilot, went off to 9 seasons. So I was on, I think, 60 different episodes in 48 countries around the world for the food show. And it was amazing. It was always a dream come true. I always wanted to work on an international food show. And you're getting paid to go around the world and eat food, essentially. You can't beat that. So from an audio perspective, it was pretty straightforward. We would have 3 lavs in the bag, single channel hops to 2 cameras, and I would put camera mic on each one of the cameras because they would break off a lot and, just knock off B-roll, or they would, when we were doing interviews out in the dining room with guests, the B camera could be shooting in the kitchen and I wouldn't be able to get good nat while we were doing that. So I had to have a camera mic on there just as a backup. And I used Lockets on both of those, and I had 2 FBs for the producers. And all the kitchens were fully operational. On diners, they shut everything down and they have complete control over the kitchens and the dining rooms. But for Delicious Destinations, we had to work in fully operational, functioning kitchens with dishwashers and chefs and cooks. So it was loud and it was busy and it was slippery and it was it wasn't dangerous, but you had to be very careful of where you were standing, and you couldn't get into people's way because you've got hot fryers and stuff everywhere and open flames. So we really had to be careful of where we were situating ourselves. So because of that, I chose not to boom anybody in the kitchen. I would hide a lav on the chef. Usually pop out of a chef coat, you can easily expose a Cos 11 just out of the top buttonhole and then kind of tape it in the background so it doesn't really move anywhere. And nobody is really looking. And I always had a white mic and a black mic, and 50-50, you're going to have a chef wearing one of those colors. So that's what we did in the kitchens. And it was just a collective decision not to run boom because it really wasn't safe. Moving around and dodging the cameras and dodging the dishwashers and dodging the waiters, and it wasn't something that we decided to do.
Now, were the producers and directors, did they have a video village set up, or were they right there with you guys? How'd that work?
So we would have a producer with us who was asking the questions. And if we were in a foreign country in a different language, we'd have a translator as well. And the translator was always mic'd up. I always kept them on a separate channel. And that translation was mostly for the producer to understand what they're talking about. It wasn't going to be a direct translation that they were going to use in the show. It was more just like a rough translation for the writers and for the producer in the field. And we would also have a writer in the field, which this is really one of the only shows that I've been on that has writers in the field. And they made that decision because you can look at footage back in an edit room and you can write about it, but unless you really are there tasting it and smelling it and experiencing what you're cooking, you're not going to be able to write as well. So they made a decision the second or third season to actually send a writer out in addition to a producer. So we had a pretty decent sized crew. We'd have 2 cameras, we'd have an AC, we'd have a writer, we'd have a producer, and then we'd always hire a local fixer, a local translator, and usually a driver or 2, and a PA as well. And fixers are invaluable. So in all the countries that I've shot in, you really have to have a fixer. And a fixer is a local producer, and they are familiar with the cultural nuances of filming in that country, and they can grease different officials upon entry with customs, and they're really an invaluable source to productions. I've been on some shoots where they won't hire a fixer, and you just show up, and it's never easy getting into some of these countries, especially if you haven't cleared anything with customs ahead of time. It's always been a tricky thing not using fixers.
Was it just you finish there and then you're hopping on a plane and going to the next place, or did you get like a day layover to enjoy the sights and sounds, or is it just nonstop action?
It was pretty much nonstop action. It depends on how long of the shoot it was and where it was. Whenever we flew to Europe, we'd take an overnight flight. We'd get there first thing in the morning. We'd have the rest of the day as a down day. But then the next day we were shooting, and we'd shoot for 4 days straight, 6 kitchens, 6 dishes, and then we'd have 2 half days of B-roll, kind of interspersed in between there. We never had like a full B-roll day. And then we would fly to the next city, sometimes in the same country. Often it was in a different country, and then we'd shoot for another 4 days, and then we'd travel home. When we went to Asia, we'd always get there, and by the time we landed, it's usually like 11 or 12 p.m., and we would have the next day off for that. So it was pretty rare to have a down day. Sometimes we would, if it was a really cool location, we would stay longer and try to do some activities. Like when we were in Thailand, we were in Bangkok, and then we went to Phuket, and we stayed an extra day, and we chartered a boat and went out to the Koh Phi Phi Islands and did some snorkeling. And we had a shoot in Tahiti, and we did the same thing where I set up a shark dive afterwards for the crew. So, if you're in a really cool place, like, all right, let's spend an extra day and, really try to take advantage of it. But, we were on the road so much that you really just, you're exhausted, and you just really want to get home afterwards.
Yes. It's not a vacation.
It's not a vacation by any means. It looks great on Facebook and on Instagram, and whenever you come back, and all my neighbors and friends are think you've been on this vacation, and it looks really glamorous, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was a great experience, and I got to see the world, but it was work, and that's the thing with our jobs is a lot of the stuff that we do, you're getting these once in a lifetime experiences, and you've just got this amazing access. Just being in television in general, we get a lot of opportunities to see things that nobody else would ever have. So you really have to appreciate that. And, it's still work, but it's a pretty amazing thing that we get to do.
Oh, that's true. Now, you also have worked on some other shows that have done international production. What were some of those?
So when I first started in television, I worked for a company called Curtis Productions. I was a staff PA, and I worked my way up to be a coordinating producer and then a production manager. And I was sending crews all over the world for these adventure documentaries that they were doing. And these guys would come back and they'd have these great pictures and great stories. And I was like, you know what? This is what I want to do. I want to get out there and I want to travel. I want to get paid to travel. So I learned how to do audio and to shoot. Just whenever the gear was in the office, it would come back, and I just kind of picked the stuff up. And main mixer at the time, his name was Joel Sartori. He taught me how to do audio by essentially breaking a rig. Like, he would take the rig and he would completely dismantle it and, switch everything off to, the incorrect settings. And this is FP32 days. And, we had all Lectrosonic 201s and 195s and stuff. So it wasn't too complicated. It wasn't these multi-frequency scanning. It wasn't like a little computer, but still he would say, all right, you've got 5 minutes to fix that because, your producer's waiting and you're ready to roll. And so he taught me how to get the rig working again quickly, because nobody likes waiting on audio. We always joke about waiting on audio, but when you're on a set and you see a bad camera angle or see bad lighting, it's easy for a producer to say, oh, let's fix that. But audio it's like an enigma. You never can see it. It's just this kind of, omnipresent thing that's just out there, and you don't really know exactly how to fix it. So that was a big learning experience for me, was to learn how to do audio quickly that way. Because of that company, I was able to start doing more international stuff with them. They would send me out as a mixer initially. I did some shoots as a field producer. We went to Mongolia for a History Channel project to look for Genghis Khan's tomb. And I went out there for 2 summers for 6 weeks each, and we lived in a yurt in the middle of nowhere and just digging up tombs looking for Genghis Khan's body, which is a pretty amazing experience. And from that experience, I was able to meet other producers and kind of sell myself as an international sound guy, and was able to kind of build that into most of my work. So I started doing a lot of documentaries initially. I had a job in Komodo Island for Discovery Channel, where we were filming Komodo dragons for 2 weeks. It was amazing. We got to this place and we had a host, and we were walking, looking for the dragons because we needed to get some of these things, and couldn't find anything. So we're hiking, and we had guides with us, and everybody has one guide with you with a stick, just as protection. And you're not allowed to. They're endangered species, so you can't actually shoot these things, obviously, but they'll chase you and they will kill you if they have a chance. So we were walking through looking for these, and then one of our guides comes running out of the forest yelling, "Komodo, Komodo, Komodo!" And literally 10 Komodos are chasing after our guide. And he brings them all right to us. So we all started running around and panicking and trying to figure out what we're doing, because we weren't expecting this at all. And we were literally being stalked by these things. They can't run for very long distances, but they will sit there and they will slowly pursue you. So it was an interesting experience being on the lower end of the food chain while we're still out there, trying to work. I did have some gear issues when I was out there. I had a lot of, not a lot, but I had several of my cables were shorting out. And I always bring a soldering kit with me wherever I go on these international shoots, because you could be in the middle of the ocean, you could be on Komodo Island and you could have gear go down. So it's always important to have a basic understanding of how to solder cables, just in case you're getting shorts. I also bring a lot of backup gear. So I always bring up, a couple extra backup wireless, an extra boom pole. I'll bring an extra shotgun mic, extra headphones, just because you never know when something's going to go down, and you're still expected to work wherever and whenever you go. So just because something goes down, it's not like a camera where, that's a critical, all of our stuff is critical, but it's easier for us to bring a backup set of wireless or backup boom, whereas, camera guy can't really bring a backup camera with him.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that sometimes you have to put camera mics on. Does the camera department, do they usually have, like little shotgun mics? Because it seems like always, the crews I work with, they all have their own mics, for the camera. But is that something you normally bring and they don't?
I do not bring camera mics with me. That's actually a really good question. I've thought about having them with me, but most, if not all, of the camera crews that I work with have them. You'll find that a lot more with cameras from rental houses. Usually they just don't include it in the kit, or it's an extra line item that they don't want to pay for. But most of the stuff that I've worked on, the cameraman or the production company will provide camera mics onto the cameras. And especially now that with multi-track recording, all of the critical audio is recorded on the sound mixer. So, back and before the multi-tracking, we were always, you'd have a FP33 or a 442 mixer, and critical audio was being recorded to cameras. This is not film days. This is like, regular TV crews with, like beta cams and digibetas and HD cam cameras. So when you're able to record the critical audio in your bag, you're able to put camera mics on cameras and use that as more of a reference and scratch track, and just make sure that you're synced up in terms of time code with a locket, and then just sending a rough mix scratch track to one channel on to the camera.
Now, you also work with Sesame Street and the Muppets, and so tell us a little bit about, miking up those guys.
So one of my first freelance gigs actually was working on a puppet show, and they were the actors and writers from Sesame Street and the Muppet Show. Several of them live in the Chicagoland area, and they were doing some side projects. And at the time, I had never done that, so I had some discussions with the director about miking techniques and just finding out how they've been doing it on Sesame Street. And puppet shows are interesting because the sets are built about 3 feet off of the ground, and the actors have their arms up and their heads down because they're looking at monitors below them. They're very mobile. They're constantly contorting and brushing up against each other and moving around. So standard mic placement on the chest doesn't work because they're moving all over the place. So we took headbands, like little sweatbands that you use for like basketball, and we would sew an elastic fabric onto that, and I could weave my cable through and attach the mic pointed downwards, placed at their forehead. And that eliminated all physical interference, and that was really the best way to mic these guys. I would also have some hats just in case they don't like headbands, and that worked equally as well. They just put a hat on backwards, and then you'd attach the mic to the front of the hat.
Okay, and since they're not on camera, it doesn't have to be pretty.
Exactly, yeah, and they do a lot of ADR afterwards too. We'll be recording lines, and the network may or may not like the voice of that one particular puppet, and so they would ADR it afterwards, and it's pretty easy to ADR a puppet because there's not a lot of exact lip syncing to do. It's just lip flap essentially. So we would you have a little bit of if you knew that your actor was going to be ADR'd, you'd have a little more leniency about if you hear any noises on set. You wouldn't bust a take because of because of a noise if you knew you were going to get ADR'd afterwards. I would also use the DPA 4088 directional headset mics on the actors. And I really love the sound of those. And those are just, it's an over-ear headset. It's a metal band that you wrap around the back of the head. And it's got like a little metal wire boom that the mic is, sitting directly next to the actor's mouth. And those sounded great, and they really isolated everybody's tracks when they were talking over each other. It did a really good job of isolating the audio. But the problem that I found that sometimes with certain actors, they would bump into them a lot if they're moving their arms, because, their arms are up. So if they, have their left arm up and they turn to the left, and it's going to rub up against the metal boom. And certain actors were constantly doing that, and other ones wouldn't do it at all. So I really had to figure out which actors those DPAs would work with and which ones they wouldn't, and then I'd have to put the headbands or the hats and all that. So it took a while of several days of trying to figure out, all right, this guy's learning his movements and techniques and figure out which mics to put on which actors.
Okay. So for those sound mixers that are getting ready to travel around the world, maybe they've never done that before, do you have any tips on what to bring and what not to bring?
Well, being prepared is critical. And a lot of people don't realize that you have to have, for certain countries, you need to have a document called a carnet, and that's CARNET. A carnet is a legal document that is stating that you are taking your equipment out of the country, bringing it to this other one, leaving with it, and bringing it back to the United States and not selling it. So it's pretty much preventing you from selling this gear and making, skirting taxes, essentially. So it doesn't totally apply to production specifically. It's more for people who are importing, exporting a lot, but we fall under that umbrella of importing and exporting equipment because, we're bringing in tens of thousands of dollars of stuff. So it's really important to make sure that your production company that's hiring you is buying one of these and giving one to you. And they're like maybe $400 or $500, but it's invaluable to have that. I've been on a particular shoot where we were going to Canada, of all places, and Canada is really the hardest country to get in and out of for work purposes that I found. Out of the 68 countries I've been to, every time I go to Canada, it's very difficult getting in there. And we had a company who did not want to do a carnet, and they essentially told us to say that we're going in as tourists and not working. And of course, lying to customs is never a good idea. And they, figured us out, and they almost deported us because of this. We had to spend hours and hours and hours, and ended up this weird loophole, and they gave us temporary residency for a week to go in and shoot. I don't know what happened, what our producer said to get us in there, but we had to pay a lot of money and promise not to do it again. But I had a gut feeling initially on that shoot, and I had mentioned to the company, I'm like, this isn't a good idea. You can't just fly by the seat of your pants going in a lot of these countries. If you're coming in with gear, you have to do it the right way. And that's where hiring a local fixer who knows the local customs officers. They can come in and, you walk up and boom, 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 they stamp your carnet and you're done. That stuff is really important. One thing that I always do is I always ask how to say, can I put a microphone on you in every country that we're in? There's a lot of cultural differences in different countries, and, going up to a person and just, sticking your hands down their shirt is, sometimes a little weird. It's weird wherever you do it, but sometimes it's just not appropriate. So you have to, I always have our translator with me and then have them ask it and kind of explain it. And some women just don't want to be mic'd, so you have to have your translator or another woman do it for you. So there's a lot of cultural understanding that you have to be prepared for when you're in different countries, just so you don't offend people.
What do you always need to be bringing when you travel overseas or out of the country? You have any I gotta have this, or you always need to take this?
Well, I always bring a really good power adapter with me, and I use a Best Tech international power adapter, and it does the 200 to 110 volt step down converter, and it's got 4 USB ports in there too, so I can charge my iPad, I can charge my phone, I can charge my Ultrasync lockets off of that, and then it's got I think 3 or 4 regular US plugs, but they have the different outlets for the different countries that you're going to. And you can get it on Amazon for like $30. It's this great, awesome power adapter that I've been able to use everywhere. Like, it's never failed me. So I always carry that with me. I pack all of my gear in Eagle Creek packing cubes. They're kind of felt rubbery, somewhat solid cubes, but a little soft and malleable, but it's really good for putting extra mics and wireless in there. I use Eagle Creek bags, just different color-coded bags for my cables, and I put all of that into a Pelican Air 1610 case, and that fits both my boom poles and my 2 shotguns, and I always bring a soldering kit wherever I go as well, just in case something goes down and you can't get new cables anywhere.
Now the big question, what is your worst on-set experience?
So I think the worst experience that I've had, I was on a shoot in Hawaii. We were filming Volcanoes National Park, and I was still pretty new. I wasn't totally familiar with my gear yet. It was kind of one of those early jobs where like, all right, you're going here. And, it was one of my earlier jobs. So I wasn't totally in rhythm with what I need and how I need to set everything up. We got to a location. We're setting everything up and I had nothing. And this is back in the days before we would multi-track. So there's no 633s, no 744s. This is like FP33 straight to camera. I forgot links to the camera. I had no hard line and I had no wireless transmitters and no wireless receivers to go to the camera. So we're about to do this whole scene with these volcanoes and I forgot my stuff. There's no way to record the audio. So I fessed up and I got to go back. And it was an hour to get back there. I went back. I got the wireless receivers. I got my transmitters. I went back to set where we were filming, and I forgot the cables to go from my mixer to the transmitter. And I had to go back one more time. It was awful, and everybody was just so pissed off at me, and I was so embarrassed. I still, to this day, think about that as a lesson. Like, all right, do you have everything? I've been driving to sets before, and I'll stop the car on the side of the road, and I'll get out, make sure that I've got everything in there, because I'm always thinking of that one time when I screwed up, not once, but twice. And it was not an easy, just like, oh, hey, let me go back to my car and get this thing. It was like a major ordeal. Like, I set us back like an entire half a day, twice. It was brutal. So I still remember that. And I don't think I ever told anybody that. That's a pretty embarrassing story. And now I'm saying it on an open podcast to everybody. They can hear that.
That's a good one. And then the follow-up question is, have you ever forgotten anything on set? So anything else have you ever forgotten that was critical, that you were just another lesson learned? After we were doing some interview at someone's house and staying at a hotel about 2 or 3 hours away, I left a boom pole. I put it by the door of the front door. And when we left, someone opened the front door, obviously, because you have to get out of the house. And my boom was hidden behind that door. So we all left. We get back to the hotel. I don't have my boom pole. It's like 10 o'clock at night. I had to drive back to this person's house, get the boom pole, and then drive back another 2 hours left. It ended up adding another like 5 hours to my day. And it was just stupid, just because, I had it by the back door to leave and it just got hidden. So I've been very good. And that was, I probably think the same year that I left the stuff in Hawaii. I mean, it was like I was still new and I was still really getting used to this whole audio thing and having all these little, pieces everywhere and cables everywhere and little accoutrements that we all have. And it's hard keeping track of all this stuff. It's like we have so many little pieces that we need to account for. The antennas, the vampire clips, the moleskin, the everything, the little batteries. Like, there's so many things that we have to be conscious of, that we have to stay on top of, that we've got it with us. So I think those two, early on in my career, screwing up and leaving stuff behind has really helped me not do that since then. Oh, that's great. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Speaking of little things, what Expendables do you like to use on set?
So I've been using undercovers, Rycote undercovers a lot with my COS 11s. I've moved over to the Ursa soft circles as well. They're very comparable to the Rycote undercovers. Rycote is a felt material and the Ursa is more of a kind of synthetic, thinner material. I like both of those, so I'll keep a couple mics pre-rigged. With that, I use super sticky dots as well behind that, because I find that the sticky part to the Rycotes don't really stick to skin or clothing as well, or it kind of, maybe halfway through the day it just drops. So I get this these little super sticky dots. It's like double-sided Hollywood tape, but it's in the perfect shape for the back of the Rycote undercover. So I use those. I go through a lot, and also you can use that over and over and over again, and so you don't have to keep on using a new Rycote every single time you mic somebody. I use vampire clips as well. And I have moleskin in my kit as well. I don't typically use it. I find that it's very visible when you're hiding a mic with moleskin. I know a lot of guys swear by it. And yeah, it sounds great when you can get a perfectly hidden mic with moleskin. But a lot of times if you've got a moleskin on a guy's t-shirt, you're going to see that. So I tend to use the undercovers and the Ursa soft circles for a lot more stuff, because it's not as visible as other options.
Can you give us a range of what kind of a rate that someone, say, working in Chicago as a production sound mixer, E&G kind of a thing?
Yeah, so the rates in Chicago, there's a good sound community here, and we're pretty tight, and we're always reaching out to each other and trying to keep rates competitive. We're all competitors, obviously. Mixer A is going against the same job with Mixer B, but we all know, or most of us know, I think that while we're still competition, we're also going to be getting jobs from each other. I refer a job to another guy if I'm double booked, and he's going to come back and do the same thing for me. It's kind of like, I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back kind of thing. We try to keep our rates pretty comparable to each other. I think a basic 10-hour day in Chicago for a mixer is about $550 to $650 just for their wages. And then a basic kit, which is a mixer recorder, 2 lavs and a boom, that's usually we try to go out for $300 with that. Sometimes we'll drop down to $250. Sometimes we'll try to go up for $350. It depends on the job. Like if it's a documentary or a friend that we want to do something with, you'll drop you're not going to turn down a job over $50. So that's I think like $850 to $900 is a pretty good starting rate for mixers in Chicago.
Okay. If somebody wanted to go into location sound, what would you recommend they do?
So advising people who want to get into location sound, if you're just in college and you're taking these classes, and do as many student films as you can, learning how to mic people, putting mics on, if you have access to gear, putting mics on your roommate or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and just practice hanging mics, hiding mics. Hiding mics is the hardest part of our job. Once you get that skill down, I think all the other stuff kind of falls in. You be on more sets, and you'll get your set etiquette. You'll figure out how to work with the different departments. Trying to help out as much as possible on any kind of student film or any. I hate saying go look at, Craigslist and Production Hub and Mandy and all those job sites, but, there's jobs out there and you can get a lot of experience on them. I've gotten jobs on Production Hub. I don't typically follow, all the leads on there, but staying on all the different sites, getting on as many forums, like Facebook forums, there's a ton of Facebook forums for sound mixers. You can ask questions, you can just follow, and you can just be a fly on the wall and read what people are talking about, because people are talking about mic techniques, people are talking about rates and how do I negotiate, working in this certain situation. Like there's so much there on every forum, like your local Chicago forum or the big freelancers forum where there's like 6,000 mixers who are all kind of going over stuff. Like there's so much there's so much info out there that you can really just kind of go through and read what everybody is talking about, and you can really learn a lot from what collectively people are putting out there on a lot of these forums.
Good stuff there. All right, Matt, well, as we kind of start to wrap things up, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
My email is matt@soundtravels.tv. Website is www.soundtravels.tv. And my Instagram tag is @soundtravels.
All right, great. Well, Matt Vogel, based out of Chicago, Illinois. You guys look him up. And hey, Matt, thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you.
And a big thanks to all of our listeners out there. If you'd like us to discuss a particular topic, please send us an email at locationsoundpodcast@gmail.com. We would love for you to subscribe and leave us a comment. We're available on Apple Podcast, and for Android users, check out Google Podcast. Also, we're on Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, sound is half the picture.